Hi, my name is Dr. Siobhan Perola-Merlo, and today I'm going to be talking to you about developing your learning potential using the Fast4Word program. Now, the Fast4Word program is a technology-based language and literacy program, and considering that 80% of the school curriculum is verbal, it's a very important program that's available to children, teens and adults alike. So, to give you a bit of an overview of what I'm going to be talking about, first I'm going to give you some basics about language and literacy development, and then I'm going to go into more about the actual program. Language development occurs through a process of association and discrimination. Most babies, the very first sound they make is the sound da. And then they start to realise that when they say that sound, Dad looks and smiles at them. So they start to begin to make an association at that stage. Then Mum might say, "Where's Dad?" And then they turn around and face Dad, and again another fuss is made. So the association gets stronger. But also discrimination processes are happening at the same time. So the baby learns, for example, if they say ba, Dad doesn't turn around. And they also learn that when they say da, no one turns around except for Dad. Now, this is how the baby develops neural pathways, and the linkages are made faster if the signal is clearer. So this is how we develop vocabulary. And in the brain, it's the way the nerves are connected is usually in the form of these hierarchies of concepts. So children learn that, for example, they learn what animals are, but then they start to learn that birds, for example, are different from mammals, such as a tiger and a mouse. But they know they're still animals because they know they're not plants. So these things start to develop in their vocabulary, and by the age of about 5, regular children have over 2,000 words in their vocabulary. So after they've understood that what they say can represent concepts in their environment, they then go to the next level and start to recognise that what they utter can be represented in actual letters. So that usually happens at the age of 5. So if we take, for example, the word dad, children start to understand that there are 3 sounds they can hear in dad, d, a, d. And then they also start to realise that these can be written in a particular way on paper. Another example is the word stack. There are 4 sounds we can hear in stack, st, a, k. And children then, after they've learnt the most basic words, they start to learn that you can have letter combinations which represent sounds as well. So the association and discrimination process is disrupted when, for example, someone's working memory is overloaded, so the associations cannot be made effectively. For example, autism spectrum disordered children, they have lots of sensory issues, so too much sensory information is coming in at once, and it's very difficult for them to make these associations. That's why we often see language delay and that sort of thing in children with autism spectrum. Another way that the working memory can be overloaded is just by the way it's taught. So if we teach children at a level that's too much or too hard for them, their working memories can become overloaded and they can't make the necessary associations. Another situation that can occur is insufficient stimulation. So for example, children who are neglected, or even children who for whatever reason are in a situation where they haven't got access to good language and teaching of language. Thirdly, input is fuzzy. So if you put your hands over your ears for a second and then start to listen to what I'm saying, you may find it difficult and it may be hard to work out what I'm saying. This is what can happen to children who have recurrent ear infections, and also children who are partly deaf or even fully deaf. The input is obviously fuzzy, and therefore their neural connections cannot form appropriately, and it makes them very difficult for them to understand what they're hearing properly. So fourth, especially in the case of dyslexic children, they're using a part of the brain other than the specialised area to do a particular job. And that's what we believe in classic dyslexia is happening. They're just using a slightly different part of the brain, which means that they can't do the job as well as usual. Another problem is attention problems, for example in ADHD, and their brains are sort of sleepy, so they can't actually focus long enough to be able to make the connection. Finally, there are genetic factors which obviously would underlie many of these issues, and there's other unknown factors. There is a lot of research going on at the moment as to why these types of things are happening, and it's very complex, obviously, because it's to do with the brain. So what is supposed to happen? We actually have in our brains neurons or brain cells that are little discrimination neurons. So all of us, if we've got good language, we would have a b-d neuron, which every time we hear the sound b, we would be absolutely able to discriminate it from the sound d. And this is what's supposed to happen. We're supposed to hear clear, it's supposed to discriminate very clearly. Now what can happen is, and this is where language and reading can go wrong, is the b-d neuron is not very fit and it doesn't discriminate well, and it leaves children confused as to what they're hearing. So this is an example of what can happen with children who have what we call receptive language difficulties. So if I said to you, the bad man let the cat out, the child who's having difficulties in this area, they're not discriminating the b very well, and they may not be discriminating the n sounds very well. And as a result, they're there thinking, was that the bad nan that let the cat out? Or was that the dad nan that let the cat out? Or was that the bad nan that let the cat out? And by the time they've worked out what actually is meant by the comment, the conversation has continued or the teaching has continued, and they're left very confused as to what's going on. So children who have these types of difficulties, they might look blank after you talk to them. They might ask you to repeat what you're saying. They might have a lot of difficulty understanding and following instructions. They may even appear to be disobedient because they didn't understand the rule when it was being explained, and then they go and break the rule, and so they're the kids that perhaps sometimes get in trouble a lot at school. So you might know some children who have these difficulties. So then, if you have these problems, you may also have troubles trying to think or retrieve from your long-term memory of what you actually want to say. So I don't know if you know anyone like this, where they actually say, the bad man let the, what's the word I'm thinking of? Oh yeah, the cat out. So it takes them a long time to get their words out. They may say the wrong words, or they may say the right words, but it's a lot slower than other people. And they may also have difficulties reading because they find it hard to retrieve from their memory the actual sounds when they're actually reading the page. So to sound out words is very hard because they have that retrieval process problem. So this then, of course, leads to potentially problems with reading. If I see a word, how on earth do I break it up? What sound is represented by each letter or each letter combination? And can I remember the sounds in my mind long enough to blend the sounds together? So the children who have ADHD, they have some of these working memory problems, and if they're sounding out the word cat, they might say k, a, t. But by the time they've got to the end and worked out what t is, they've forgotten the first two sounds. So it's very hard to blend under those circumstances. So if we take an example, if we see what this word is here, we look at how we will, okay, so here's a reading example. Look at the word. Now the first thing you've got to do to be able to read it is you've got to be able to break it into two. There are two sounds in this word, and then what you've got to be able to do is to say those two sounds. Th air. And then after you've done that, you've got to be able to blend them. So that's very tricky if you have some of those problems. So now if we look at spelling, if you have those problems, you're likely to have problems spelling as well. So if I hear a word, how do I break that word up into different sounds? What letters or letters, and they're called graphemes, represent each of those sounds that I can hear? And finally, what order do I put these graphemes in to make the whole word? And we actually have a part of our brain that is specifically there to work out what order to put things in. So if that isn't working very well, we can have problems with our spelling. So here's the spelling example. If I said to you the word station and you wanted to spell it, you would have to hear it and then be able to work out what sounds you can hear in the word and break them up. So this is quite a tricky word, and it's got a number of different sounds. St, a, sh, n. Then not only do we have to be able to hear them and break them up, we have to then be able to work out what letters represent each of those sounds, and then we have to put them in the correct order. Then after all of that, we are then asked in our lives to be able to understand what we hear and what we read, extract the main points often, make inferences, understand idioms and metaphors, etc. So these are higher order difficulties that some kids can have because they've had problems right back at the beginning. And another higher order task that we're often asked to do is to be able to carefully construct sentences, paragraphs, essays, use language conventions such as grammar and punctuation, and make sure that we logically sequence what we're trying to say, and also take into account the audience. So as we can see, if we have troubles in any of these other areas, obviously we're going to have trouble at the higher order level. So what is FastForWord? FastForWord is a computer-based program which strengthens neural pathways in the brain by facilitating the association and discrimination process of language and literacy learning. Now, the goal of FastForWord is to challenge a child, teen or adult, until he or she meets the criteria for his or her current developmental level in lower and higher order skills required for language and reading. And also I should qualify that there's a reading assistant program that goes with FastForWord, and that's basically a set of readers that children and teens can use to accompany the program. So here's a summary of language and literacy development, and this just shows you how FastForWord addresses each of these levels of development. So at the bottom we can see we've got the baby, and first of all we discussed language and vocabulary development. So the understanding that utterances or words can represent concepts in the environment. And as I said to you before, it's the autistic children or the autism spectrum children that often have difficulties at this very low level. Then, after we've been able to establish some level of vocabulary, we then start to work out that what we write can represent what we say. Then finally, at the very top are the higher order activities that we do, which are reading for meaning and comprehension, and also writing. Now, if you look at the other side, we can see that we have modules of the FastForWord program which address each of these levels. So FastForWord language or literacy for teens is what they do first. Then the second module is language to reading. Then following that, people do the reading modules 1 to 5, depending on their age and developmental level. So FastForWord facilitates improvements in auditory processing and processing speed, spelling and reading, phonemic and phonological awareness and decoding, which is basically sounding out and understanding what graphemes or letters represent different sounds, understanding and following instructions, verbal expression, comprehension for listening and reading, concentration, attention and memory. We have to deal with this issue because otherwise we won't be able to blend words and we won't be able to understand what we're reading. Writing, and after we've done all this, because all our curriculum, even maths, is heavily inundated with language, this program can help people get access to the curriculum in all subject areas. So how does Fast ForWord work? What Fast ForWord does is it slows down rapid changes in speech so that the learner can accurately hear those small acoustic differences. Once the learner has achieved competency at specific frequencies, the program then speeds them up until they approximate normal. So here is a graph, or two graphs, showing what we're talking about here. In the first graph, we're looking at the discrimination between the two sounds ba and da. Now, the b and the d sounds in normal speech take about 40 milliseconds to be able to be processed accurately if you've got normal auditory processing. However, if you don't, and that's hard for you, what the program can do is slow it down. And as you can see in the second graph, it slows those consonant sounds down and doubles the amount of milliseconds spent on them so that a person with these difficulties can start to be able to discriminate between those two sounds. And when they get good enough at the 80 milliseconds, it will then make it to 60. And then it will go smaller and smaller until it approximates the 40, which is normal speech. So now let's look at the implementation of Fast ForWord. So there are 5 to 7 activities per module, ranging from lower to higher order language and literacy activities. There's a choice between 30, 40 or 50-minute protocols times 5 sessions per week. So the language V2 is the first module, or literacy for teens, and language to reading or literacy advanced. And then the reading modules go up to age level. And depending on their age, they can potentially skip a couple of the reading modules. On average, it takes 1.5 months, I think, in my experience, for each person to complete the modules, but longer for children whose difficulties are more pronounced. So some children may even take 5 months to do a module just because they have more severe difficulties. Reading Assistant is a computer-based reader program, and that can be done in conjunction with Fast ForWord or following Fast ForWord. It just depends on the child and what they're able to do in a day. So these are the reasons I like Fast ForWord. Firstly, 80% of the school curriculum is verbal, so I feel this program can help a lot of kids. Secondly, as we talked about before, this program can be an antidote for the disruptions to language and literacy development that we talked about. So, for example, the program adjusts to each particular child and therefore won't overload the working memory, and it will help that child make discriminations and associations and facilitate that whole process. Thirdly, it's like a gym for the brain, helping people of all ages and abilities. And I would even go as far as to say it's like a personal trainer for the brain, because each activity, some people are better at some activities than others, and the computer system will then cater for that by giving more of those activities that the person is finding difficult, so helping them to get up to speed on those. And also throughout the program, on any particular day, it will do the same thing. It will adapt to where the person is at. It's developed using proven principles of neuroscience. Now, neuroscientists have also studied motivation, so they know how to keep people motivated. We know with neuroscientific research that if we want to change your brain, it is like going to the gym. You wouldn't expect to do something once and then actually have a change in your fitness. This is the same with the way the brain works. You have to do it consistently. Even I would say you'd start to see changes at about 40 days of doing an activity. So what this program does is it does do 5 times a week for at least half an hour. So you need that sort of rigour to be able to see changes in the way the brain works. and you need immediate and unequivocal feedback on your output, and that again is what this program does, and it includes those sort of motivation type issues, so it gauges it to an 80% challenge so that the person can feel good about it, not hopefully get bored, but on the other hand not be challenged so much that they give up. So what we see in the research, and another reason I like it, is because it is based on a lot of rigorous research. So what we see in general is achievement gains of 1 to 2 years in as little as 8 to 12 weeks. It sounds amazing, but if you understand how the program works, you can actually see that it is possible. Number 6, the good thing about it is that once they've addressed the lower order issues that we've talked about today, what you see is changes in people's learning that are permanent. So once they've done a lot of the program, they actually start to be able to learn better, their language improves, and their literacy is improved as well. And it's a sustained improvement. It's very easy to implement. It's done over the internet with some headphones, and most kids, in my experience, are able to do it by themselves independently of any adult help, although sometimes they might need it. So it's very easy to implement. A child can do it at home, and all they will need is the internet and a couple of headphones. And parents don't have to be involved generally, unless the child needs a lot of help. Usually adults don't have to be there. And secondly, it's very cost effective. So if you were to hire a therapist for the same amount of time that a child spends doing Fast for Word, it would probably cost significantly more. And that's why I think it's probably one of the most efficient ways to get to the desired goal of improving a child's language and literacy. So here's an example of some of the engaging characters and graphics they use on the Fast for Word program. And if you look on the left-hand side, they have, in the first module, which is language, they have 7 different activities ranging from lower order activities such as Sky Gym right up to Space Commander, which is a higher order activity. And on the right-hand side, we have 5 activities in the language to reading module. And again, they range from lower to higher order, but they start to bring in letters into this particular module. Also, just to remind you, the program systematically addresses memory, attention, processing speed and sequencing throughout to address these, to help facilitate that process of association and discrimination that we've talked about today. Here is, I wanted to show you this research because I think it's so impressive. What the Nevada Department of Education did a huge study, and they tested a whole series of different reading programs, and what they found was that Fast for Word by far significantly improved reading and writing proficiency levels in their district. So as you can see, it improved it by 22.2 percentage points across the district. So that was the first very impressive one. And secondly, another study has shown that, so if we look at the very first picture we have here of a brain, and this is looking at the left side of the brain, we can see that this is a person who is a normal reader, and it's showing a picture of what their brain activation looks like when they're doing a rhyming problem. So there's those red bits that are lit up, that shows what parts of the brain are working in a normal reader. Now the second picture, on the other hand, we can see this is a dyslexic child, and there's no activation in those key areas that need to be lit up. However, if we go down to the bottom 2 pictures of the brain, one's the right side and the other is the left side, we can see that those areas are activated, and this is actually the same dyslexic child, however it's following remediation. So after they have done the Fast for Word program, those key brain areas are now lit up, which I think is really exciting. Thanks very much for watching, And if you have any questions or you'd like to contact me, please feel free. I would love to hear from you.